Moving on to number 5 out of the top 10, and this is a very important point that you highlight a lot, and that is the shrinking working population. People who can go out and actually work, that growth rate is dropping fast, and that affects the growth rate of the economy. Just look at this. People of working age, that growth rate is slowing around the world, including in India. In 1950 to 2005, 8 odd, the average growth rate of the working age population was about 1.8. Now it's down to 1%. You know, that kind of drop in population growth rates is huge, much more than people actually, the figures just appear. It's a huge change.
And so different from, again, the narrative of the 70s and 80s, and which I think many politicians, including in India, are still stuck with, that we need a population control policy. But as we'll see, that everywhere we're seeing a huge decline now take place in the population growth rates and
working age.
Yes, resulting in a big decline in the working age population growth rate, which are people between the age of 15 to 64.
Right.
And I think that this is something which is so underappreciated.
Yeah.
That there are two drivers of economic growth.
Right.
The number of people who come to work,
right,
and their productivity.
Yes.
That's just a very simple
yes.
economic equation.
Right.
And they typically, historically, both have contributed to economic growth in equal measure.
Right.
So if your population growth rate of the working age population in particular is going to slow down, or nearly half.
It's going to affect your growth rate,
it's going to
GDP
affect
growth rate.
It has to affect your economic growth rate.
Right.
And I think that that switch people haven't made as yet.
Yeah.
We keep speaking about the growth rates, whether India wants 7-8%, or even China wants 6%, or US, you know, Trump speaks about 3, 4, 5 kind of percent growth rates.
Right.
Those growth rates with these kind of population trends we have become impossible to achieve, and we refuse to accept that.
We have to shift our whole attitude to what is possible, giving this drop in working age number of workers available.
Yeah.
And you don't think productivity improvements through tech will compensate for that drop?
We will see why not in a bit, but so far there's no evidence, is that the productivity increases have been somewhat disappointing given the tech boom that we have seen. Now, people talk about data quality not being measured properly, but I think it's got to do with other trends, as we will see in the show.
Okay, globally, people of working age growth rate is dropping, so you're having fewer people joining the workforce. India too, just have a look at it. It's not quite the same as global, different figures, but India is no exception. Working age population growth is slowing in India dramatically as well. If you look at the growth rate of the working age, it used to be about 2.5% a year. It's now down to 1.4. Now, globally, it's 1, from 1.8 to 1. Here, it's 2.5 to 1.4, which is also a dramatic change in India.
Yeah. We forget here in India, too, that in the 1960s, the average family, the fertility rate, the number of kids that they would have, would be about 5 or 6. Now we are down to about 2, a bit above 2 in terms of average.
Huge change, yes.
So it's a huge change that's taking place. So you're having both in terms of birth rates going down, and people are living longer, but the birth rates have really, really declined in India as well. And if you have a working age population growing at just 1.4%, it is extremely difficult for your economy to grow above 5 or 6%. That to get the balance from productivity
is very tough.
And that's what we've seen with other countries too.
What was actually another startling factor that you unearthed was that it's not growing at 1% or 1.5. There are many countries where negative growth rate, the working population is going down. If we have a look at what Ruchir calls depopulation of the working age, people of the working age. Depopulation is falling in many countries. Working population is falling in many countries, dropping. It's a negative growth rate. Let's have a look at the working age growth rate. In 1985, only 2 countries did the working age population have a negative growth. In 2019, 42 countries have a negative. It's not that it's slowing down, it's minus.
It's contracting. So in 1985, those 2 countries were, I think, Afghanistan, Somalia, basically who cares, right? And now you have an instance where these 42 countries include China, Japan, Italy, Germany,
negative,
Russia,
contracting working age population.
So I think that this is a huge change that's taking place and something we still haven't quite appreciated.
the opposite of the demographic dividend.
Or the demographic boom, or if you remember, the population bomb.
Right.
That was the big theme
Worry,
of development economics in the 70s and 80s, and even
First
in
it was
India.
the bomb, then the dividend, and now, man, you have to worry.
It's the depopulation bomb.
Yeah, depopulation bomb. So based on that, as you were just saying, with a slowing growth rate in working age population, is it fair to expect an economy like India to grow 7, 8, 9% like China used to? According to Ruchir, that has to change. You cannot expect that kind of growth rate anymore because of a smaller growth in working age population. Just look at what the new benchmarks should be. These are new benchmarks for economic success. If you achieve these, you're doing well, man. Fewer workers will actually mean slower economic growth, as you just mentioned. So, for low-income countries, expect something around 5% as a successful growth rate. Wow, it's no longer 8, 9%, or double digits, it's 5, and be happy. Middle-income countries, 3 to 4% is very good, and developed countries, 1 to 2%. And you're happy because you got negative there. A lot of the countries you mentioned were, whether it's shrinking, were developed countries.
Yeah. So if you go back to a decade ago, the number of countries in the world which were able to grow at above 7%, or which were growing at above 7%, there were about 40 such countries in the world which were registering a growth rate of above 7%, 40.
Right.
In 2019, there were only 8 to 9 countries in the world which registered a growth rate of more than 7% of the 190 countries for which data is tracked.
8 to 9.
8 to 9 compared to more than 40 which were there in a decade ago. So a massive crunch of that. And those 8 to 9 were mostly the small African countries where even I don't know how much to trust the data, but whatever it is like very small. So it's become extremely difficult in this environment to grow at a rate of more than 7%. And yet we keep thinking our benchmark for economic success needs to be 7%, 8 to 9% growth, and we sort of make all sorts of projections of $5 trillion economy based on these kind of projections. But that is just unrealistic, is my feeling about this. Now, if India truly gets back to a growth rate of above 5%, the problem is the data quality. We don't know what the true growth rate as yet is as far as India is concerned.
There is genuinely global worries about Indian data quality,
Well,
because it never used to be. We used to be, all of them are Bengalis and we're damn good at statistics, man.
But the government itself is now acknowledging that. They've set up a committee, I think, to look at the whole point that what exactly...
But there's global worry about this.
Yes, and like in terms of the fact that people do question, because there's such a big disconnect between the real-time indicators you get and also what the headline GDP numbers are.
Right.
So most important point here is that if India can genuinely get back to a growth rate of 5% or more, not based on today's data, but the corrected data, I think that would be a fairly good achievement. But we are still some distance, it seems, away from that.
So, as you put it, that India's economic growth, the rank globally is dropping badly, and that's a big worry for us. Just have a look at this. Economic growth, in those terms, India's rank around the world is dropping sharply. Here's India's rank. Just have a look. In 2010, India was the 14th best or fastest growing country in the world. 2019, India's 44th best. And that's if you take the data as authentic and genuine at 5%.
Yes.
Or 4.9. If it's actually 2% less than that, we'll be 80th or 90th.
Right. So yeah, so I think that that's what's
14
happened.
to 44th is a shocker.
That the growth rates have come off so much, and so have our rankings.
And growth rates come out without taking into account correct data.
Right.
Even with this worrying data, it's still come down from 14 to 44. That is a shocker. So let's have a look at the fifth of the top 10 trends globally for the 2020s. This is what it looks like. Number 5, depopulation marches on. We're talking particularly about the working age population. So expect a world with a slower growth. So change your benchmarks, shift your mind.
Yeah.
Forget 9, 10%, now go back to 5 for poorer countries.
Yes, that's right. And for developed countries too, like the US economy is basically growing at 2%. In terms of the average growth rate. But at 2% plus economic growth, the US looks like the best in the class, which are the developed countries, with an unemployment rate which is at 50-year lows.
Right.
So,
and now, I must say, US has a huge base. So 2% means
But even in the US,
significant.
Until 5 years ago, a 2% growth rate was considered very disappointing. So this is the new reality, which they seem to have adapted to much more now.